So today we're looking at Unit 2, and just a recap for Unit 2. And like I said, in the next, and Unit 3 is already up, Unit 1's already up. I just never got this recording down. So in Unit 2, what we're looking at is measure the economy, and the chapters that we had were GDP, inflation, growth, and unemployment, and aggregate demand, aggregate supply. So when you think about GDP, we're thinking about, so GDP is, if you remember, our gross domestic product. And this is largely looking at the income of our country. And with GDP, there were a couple ways we could measure it. We were able to measure it by, or to calculate, and we could have calculated it by either what we produce, and with production, what we would do is we would say, well, we have our durable goods, our non-durables, services, structures, and change in inventory. And then we just basically add all these together. So if we had something like 3, 1, 5, 2, and 0, we just add these together, uh, and suppose that all of these are $1 trillion, because why not? And if we add all these together, we get 3 and 2 is 5, and 5 is 10, 11. So in this economy, we would have $11 trillion. And the other way to do it is by what we consume, or our consumption side. Or I should say, by what we spend. So on this side, what we do is we say that our GDP is equal to our consumption, plus our investments, plus our government expenditures, plus our net exports. Where our net exports was equal to our exports minus our imports. And each component of GDP in this measure, each component's there. So in this, Y is our, I don't want to say real, I just want to say Y is our GDP. C is our consumption. And consumption, remember, is spending done by consumers primarily. I was for investments. And an investment, remember, was a spending by a firm, but this is not for a, excuse me, this is not for materials. This is not for your materials and ingredients, but instead it's for your capital, your mainly like your physical capital. So the machines you use to complete, or the machines that you use to make a product, or the building that you build to make your product. These are all going to be considered investments. Um, and again, the materials themselves wouldn't be, because the materials to create your good are not going to be, because they're counted later on down the road. G was our government spending. NX was net exports. And exports are exports, imports are imports. So with our GDP, one of the things we can use to tell this is what's going on in the, it's one of the big indicators of what's going on in the economy. And in this, we talked about business cycles. And of the business cycles, 2 that we introduced were booms and recessions. But the 2 main ones that we talked about, and the 2 that get mentioned the most, are going to be recessions. And our recessions are going to be 2 consecutive quarters. with no GDP growth. And where a quarter is a quarter of a year, so we have Q1, Q2, Q3, so on throughout the year. Um, these quarters, we're gonna have two of these in a row without any growth, or two in a row with decline, whichever is applicable for our situation. And then the other type of thing we had was a depression. And with the depression, what we see is it's a very, in short, it's a very bad, very long recession. When we're in a depression, there'll be kind of no light at the end of the tunnel. So if right now we go into, so if, well, not right now, but if at the end of quarter two this year, we go into a recession, we'll see that there's a light at the end of the tunnel, right? We're going to say, well, yeah, we are in a recession, but once people get back to work, once the fear of the virus is kind of relieved, then we're going to be back to normal and and the economy back up to where it needs to be. Whereas with the depression, it's a little more like, oh, this is never going to end, right? So we have our business cycles, and uh, we want to know what both of those are. And then what we ended our GDP chapter with was a little talk on GDP per capita. And this was just equal to our GDP divided by our population. So to find this, we can suppose that our GDP was equal to, say, $2,700 billion, which in essence is 2.7 trillion, and our population was equal to, say, 200 million. And this would be a common format that you'd see this presented in. It might be a table, but you see something similar to this. So in this case, what we need, the first thing we have to do before we calculate our GDP per capita is we need these to be like terms. So the way I go about that is I say, well, 200 million is just 0.2 billion. If you want to, you can write out all the zeros, but that's up to you. So for GDP per capita, we'll do is, now that we have like terms, we'll take 2,700 billion over 0.2 billion. These billions will cancel out. So 27 over 0.2 is 27 times 5. And that comes out to $13,500. And this is telling us that the average person in this country makes $13,500. So after GDP, we got into a talk on economic growth. And with this, as far as the test goes, it's a fairly quick part. But the main thing from here that we're interested in is we're interested in how or what kind of system promotes economic growth. And more of like a sustained growth. So when we're thinking about this, what we're going to look at is a couple things, but one of the big things that we need is adherence to a rule of law. And with this rule of law, we have a system of laws where, hey, my property is not going to be stolen or anything like that. And a part of this rule of law, we're going to have property rights. And with our property rights, we're just saying, hey, this is my stuff. I can choose what to do with it, or whatever I want to do. It's up to me to decide what to do with my stuff, right? If I want to take my phone right now and throw it out of the window, that's my own business. No one else can really say anything. People might say, "Oh, that's uh, a little bit out there," but it's my own business. It's my own property. So we have property rights. Says I can do what I want with my stuff. And then in addition to property rights, we have contractual rights. And with contractual rights, what we're saying is that I can come in and I can use, let me rephrase that. If I want to allow somebody else to use my stuff or my property, I can do that. And we can make a contract to say, all right, here's the terms at which you can use my stuff. Here's how much you have to pay. Here's how long you can use it for, and so on. So if we make a contract and I say, hey, yeah, you can use, we'll let you rent out our spare bedroom for $300 a month or something like that, then what we're going to do is we're going to say, all right, 300 a month. For that, you get the spare bedroom. There may be some things that say, well, here are kind of the way things work and so on. And yeah, so we have our contractual rights, which say that I can do stuff like that. And if you don't adhere to the contractual right or to our contract, you can be evicted, you can be kicked out, or you can do whatever you want with the contract. Or, excuse me, you can't do whatever you want with the contract, but if you don't adhere to the contract, then you may have some sort of legal repercussion for that. That's the main thing we looked at with growth. The main thing that we're looking at and I'm covering is contract rights and property rights. And the reason that they're important for growth is that they will. So if I have to worry about my stuff being stolen every day, I may be worried to go out and work, worried to do what I need to do, right? So since I know, hey, if someone were to steal something of mine, I can go and get that legal repercussion. Or if I let somebody borrow something of mine and they don't play nicely with it or they don't return it like they're supposed to, then I can take legal action against them. And because I know that that's there, I'm not really worried about, well, am I going to get scammed? Is someone going to steal from me? Because if they do, I can just take them in and uh, take that legal action against them. And again, that's not saying you have to be reasonable. So, maybe I don't just go out and throw $100 bills on the street saying, oh, yeah, well, it's my property. I can do what I want with it. But again, within reason, if we want to be reasonable with it. But uh, for the most part, I don't have to worry too much about anything like that. So the next chapter we looked at was unemployment. And with unemployment, we saw that individuals got broken down into 3 groups. We had our employed, our unemployed, and those who are not in the labor force. And we said that our employed workers, our employed individuals, are those who are working for pay. So they go out, they work, they get paid, right? This is your regular, I have a job, right? I have a job, I'm making money, and I work every day or however often you work, and so on. Your unemployed are going to be those who are not working, but they are looking for work. So something happens, I lose my job, and once I lose my job, I get back on the market and I'm looking for work. Looking for work is considered in the past 4 weeks. right? So again, I lose my job, start saying, hey, all right, I lost my job, need to find something else to replace it. So I start looking for work to get something to work to, replace my current job if something like that were to happen. And then are not in the labor force are those who are not working, but also not looking for work. And these folks who are not in the labor force got sorted out into there are a couple popular examples that we had for these. So these would be our discouraged workers, our uh, excuse me, our retirees and students. And again, just two sides of the two sides of your career. That's pre-career, post-career. Uh, we had housekeepers. So if you just stay home and you take care of the house, you're going to be not in the labor force. Then the last group was our military. And again, because the military can kind of play by some different rules than what uh, rest of the market, the rest of the labor market gets to. So we have our three categories, and what we get, and then after we introduce unemployment, we talked about, well, how do we calculate it? So our unemployment rate, if you remember, was equal to our unemployed. Oops. Divided by the labor force. And the labor force was equal to our employed plus our unemployed. But then we said, well, there's a second story to be told with this. And what the second thing that we're interested in is what's called our labor force participation rate. And this was equal to our labor force divided by our population. And in this case, our population is equal to our labor force plus those who are not in the labor force. So then we got into talk about, so the second half of unemployment was looking at why is there unemployment? So why do we have a case where, hey, why doesn't everybody just have a job and everybody going out working and making money and so on? And for this, we're gonna introduce two types, or we introduced two types of unemployment. The first was called cyclical, and this was our short run unemployment. And what this does is it's going to correspond to, excuse me, it'll correspond to upswings and recessions, or ups and downs in the economy. And the large reason we have this cyclical unemployment is because of sticky wages. And with sticky wages, what we did was we basically said, hey, wages do not always adjust, or do not instantly adjust to changes in the labor market. Okay. So my wage so the wage that I have right now is going to be the same wage from now until at least August, right? And same thing if you work at like a fast food restaurant or Walmart, they're going to say, "Hey, this is your wage, and after so many months, you'll get a raise," or whatever the case is. But for the most part, they say, "Hey, your wage is your wage. It doesn't get adjusted every day or anything like that." So we have our sticky wages. And you'll also want to look into in the unemployment chapter, there was a list of reasons. There was that list of reasons for sticky wage unemployment, implicit contract, um, and a bunch of other stuff, adverse selection, all that. Um, Go back, have that when you go to take your exam, just have that handy somewhere. Um, it might help you. It might not, but it might help you. So have that handy and be comfortable with what each one is and kind of how they work, or the basic idea of them. And that's the main part of our short run unemployment. The second type of unemployment was whatever. Second type was our long run unemployment. And this part got broken down into two components. But what they both fed into was what we call our natural rate of unemployment. And this was our unemployment rate in a normal, healthy economy. So when we think about our long run unemployment, we broke this down into two categories. The first being called frictional, and frictional employment basically just says this is when we are unemployed between jobs. So, I go on, I look for a new job, and then I get hired somewhere, right? And as I get hired somewhere, I'm going to say, well, cool, I'm hired, and I'm going to find this. I'm going to find this new job, but there's going to be some time between the time that I leave my job and the time I enter that new job where I'm unemployed. Or maybe it's a situation where I say, you know what, I'm moving to Boise, Idaho. So I leave my current job and say, hey, I'm out. I go up to Boise and start looking for a new job up there. The idea with frictional is that it's something that we're going to have consistently because people switch jobs, uh, right? People decide they don't like what they're doing or they want to get into a new field or whatever the case is. But it takes time, the job search process, or even just the process to unload from one job and get on with another firm. It just takes time to do. So we have our frictional unemployment. For an individual, it will be short run, but for society, there will always be people in that group. Then the second type that we saw was called structural. Oops, my bad. And with structural, what we basically said was that um, jobs are no longer available for a worker. Right. So again, if we think about how many people you need to work in a farm, maybe 200 years ago, you needed hundreds of people to work a farm, whereas today, with technology improvements, you have just a few that actually need that. And the big categories that we looked at for structural were We had unions, labor laws, oops, and technology. So unions and labor laws basically work and they make labor more expensive, which makes demand decrease for labor. But with technology, what we saw was uh, something like with farming, right? So whereas previously I needed all these people to work in this field, whereas now I only need a few, right? So technology has made it where we don't need as many workers. So now those workers can go work somewhere else. But if your only skill is to be a farmhand or that's all you know, then you need to find something else that you can be good at or pick up new skills or whatever the case is. So we have our structural unemployment. And this again is a more of a long-term type thing. And again, if I am in so if something happens where my job becomes no longer available or doesn't exist anymore, then if I don't pick up new skills or I don't go looking for something new, um, then I will be unemployed for the long run. But if I go in, pick up new skills, it could potentially for me be a shorter run unemployment just because we are able to pick up new skills and all that good stuff. So we have frictional and structural being long rate or long run unemployment, and that was our unemployment chapter. So the next bit we got into looked at inflation. And with inflation, what we largely saw was the price of goods will rise over time. So stuff today is more expensive than it was 50 years ago. But also, in addition to prices of good rising, we see that in general, labor is a good too. So price of goods, and that includes labor, will rise over time. And when we were looking at inflation, the way we went about this was we would first calculate the price of a basket of goods. So if we have a thing where, say, we have a simple economy with fish and corn, we have a price and a quantity. Suppose the price of fish is, actually, I want to do it the other way. I want to say we have a quantity that goes into our basket and a price in 2018 and a price in 2019. So suppose that in our economy we produce 100 fish and 75 corn. And the price of fish in 2018 was $5, while the price in corn was $3. Then in 2019 we'll have 6 and say 4. So the first thing we're interested in is the cost of the basket. And to calculate this, we'll just take the quantity times price and add them together. So 5 times 100 is 500 plus 3 times 75 is 225. 500 and 225 gives us $725. And then for 2019, 6 times 100 is 600. 4 and 75 is 300. 600 and 300 is $900. So we have our cost of our basket. Then we wanted to find our CPI. And to find our CPI, we're going to say that 2018 is the base year. Oops. So in this case, what we'll do is we'll say that our CPI is equal to the price in any year divided by the price in 2018 times 100. So in 2018, we have 725, or 725 is 1 times 100 is 100. Then for 2019, we'll say that the price in 2019 was 900 over 725, then multiply that by 100. So 900 divided by 725 is 1.241 times 100. This gives a CPI of 124.1. And then if we want to calculate our inflation, we'll do that. So inflation will be the CPI from a given year minus the CPI for the previous year divided by the CPI for the previous year times 100. So in this example, we have 124.1 and 100. So for 2019, our CPI from 2019 was 124.1. Our CPI from 2018 was 100. Divide that by 100 and multiply that by 100. Our hundreds will cancel out. 124 minus 100 is 24.1. So our inflation rate would be 24.1%. And we don't have it for 2018 because we would need 2017's data. But that kind of runs you through how to calculate inflation and everything there. And then we're interested in the cost or we should say, we'll say the cost and benefits to inflation. And this again is something that was kind of listed. So because this was a list, I'm just gonna say, hey, look into it in the inflation chapter. So again, this would be in our inflation chapter list. Some of the things you'll look for with that were when we think about, well, whose benefits and who's better off from it. If I'm holding cash, I don't really like inflation because I'm losing value. My cash is losing value as we go through time. Or let me rephrase that. My cash is losing purchasing power as we go through time. But if I'm holding something like like gold, or if I'm holding something like a stock, or if I have debt, so I take out a mortgage to buy a house, and then all of a sudden there's this hyperinflation. I'm really not going to mind that much because, if I go out buy $100,000 house, if there's this inflation, maybe tomorrow it's worth $400,000, right? Probably would never be that drastic, but something like that could potentially happen. So we have our inflation, and just be comfortable with how that works. I'll let you know after we're done with ADAS which slide that's on. Meaning I'll go back look at it for you. So the last little bit that we have is our aggregate demand and aggregate supply. And yeah, it's fairly straightforward for what we have on the third exam as well. So last little bit we had was AD-AS model. And what we looked at with this was just our aggregate demand and aggregate supply. So with this, we have our graph, we have a price level, and our real GDP. And then we had our aggregate demand, which would be a downward sloping curve, something like that. And then we have our aggregate supply, which I normally draw something like that. But you could see it as, you could also see it as a flat line, aggregate supply. If you see it sloped in any way that's not a vertical line, it's going to be short run. But then we also had our long run, which would look something like that. So if we're saying, well, what's the equilibrium of our economy? Or what's our equilibrium in aggregate supply, aggregate demand? We find where aggregate demand meets aggregate supply. And then we find our price level and our GDP. So in this case, our equilibrium is at P star and Y star. Yeah. Sorry about that. I had a little distraction. So we have our P star, Y star, and this tells us where we are. And this would be very similar to what we would call our realized price level and GDP. So we have our price level and GDP, right? We can take it, you can plug numbers in, then you'll be good to go. So the other parts, there are kind of two more parts, aggregate demand, aggregate supply, that really emphasize. The first was looking at shifts in aggregate demand and aggregate supply. And in general, more confidence. Or let me rephrase this. Aggregate demand will be shifted by a couple things. So an increase can be caused by an increase in confidence, an increase in government spending, or a decrease in taxes. So if I'm confident about the future, I'm going to go out and spend more. Same thing if the government spends money, that increases aggregate demand, or if I have a cut in taxes, I have more money to spend, so I'll go out and spend more. A decrease will be caused by a fall in confidence, a decrease in government spending, or an increase in taxes. And then the shifting itself looks like it did for regular supply and demand. Just you shift the demand curve, shift the supply curve, and you're good to go. And the main thing we're looking at here is the shift in aggregate demand. That's the main part you need to really be comfortable with, and you'll be happy. So the third part and final part of aggregate demand, aggregate supply that we really emphasize, that we got into, was using it to, so use our aggregate demand, aggregate supply model to see inflation, growth, and unemployment. So when we have that, what we'll do is, excuse me, see a couple things. So we have our price level and our real GDP going down, or I'm going to draw my, excuse me, draw our short run aggregate supply, then our long run aggregate supply, long run aggregate supply, and then suppose we have aggregate demand somewhere down here. So we have a couple of points. So we'll see that our GDP is right here. So we have a real GDP and a price level. So when we look at this aggregate demand, well, we can see a few things. The first bit that we can look at is our unemployment. And this doesn't give us like a direct, hey, this is the unemployment rate. But what it does do is it gives us a nice, not even an estimation for it, but just an idea. Is unemployment high, low, medium, or what? So if we're not making a lot of goods, we can infer that unemployment is relatively high. So unemployment, we look at the distance. Between our GDP, or between our output, and our long run aggregate supply. This little bit is our unemployment. The second thing we can tell from this is our inflation. And to do this, we can say, well, suppose we have a boom, right? And this increases our aggregate demand up a little bit. So we get up here at 82. If we have this boom now, our equilibrium moves up here. So now we have a new price level and a new output. So when you think about inflation, what we're going to look at is just like a few minutes ago, the percent change in price level. So we are looking up here. Oops. Let's make this look a little nicer. Sure. That little distance there will give us an idea of our inflation. And again, just like before, what we'll do with inflation is take P2 minus P1 over P1 times 100. And that'll give us a percentage. Then the third thing we can see is growth. And this will be our percent change in output. So when we go from Y1 up to Y2, we can see our growth. But then, so kind of two ways to see. We can see this with a percent change in output, which again was how much did our economy grow? But the other way we can look at this is a growth in productivity. So we can see a growth in output. We can also see growth in productivity. And this will be by the by our long run aggregate supply curve shifting to the right. Because in the long run, tools and machinery and stuff like that don't care about inflation or price levels. So that's why that long run aggregate supply is a vertical line. We see the long run aggregate supply shifting to the right in the long run, and that's going to be our growth and productivity, making us more productive and so on. So that's mainly what I have for this second unit. I'm going to get the video done, and then we can do whatever we want to do.